Trajan has been receiving a ton of hype as a commander, and rightfully so. He increases skill damage and rage generation. So in this video, we're going to review him, breaking down where his skills are strong, which pairings really might be the very best, and also talking about what talent builds you should try. So stick around in this video for everything you need to know about Trajan. Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I'm Chisgule, a sponsored content creator for Rise of Kingdoms, and although Trajan has landed in the game as of this time, we got a universal wheel in Kingdom 75. So we unlocked this commander in Kingdom 2. We tested a bunch of his skills and the mechanics so that we can actually advocate how these things really work in battle, and I'm hyped to tell you everything we know. If you like Rise of Kingdoms guides that help you get value and smash your enemies, then hey, consider smashing that subscribe button for daily Rise of Kingdoms videos. In this commander guide, we're going to start by reviewing the skills, with an emphasis not just on reading them, but in telling you what we have learned by testing with them in Kingdom 2. Then, we're going to break down the builds that we think are really good for this commander, and whether or not he should be the primary or secondary commander. And last but not least, we're going to talk about pairings, because for this commander, ooh, man, there are a lot of very compelling pairings, because guess what? He doesn't actually care what troop type you bring, although he will want to see mixed troops. That would be preferred. We'll talk about where you should use mixed troops and where you shouldn't, but first let's review the skills. The first skill is giving a massive buff and a debuff. Okay, direct damage factor 300 and increasing skill damage by 25% for himself and nearby marches, and restoring 40 rage, by the way. By the way, that lasts for 3 seconds, and this expertise skill makes the active skill better. So we're going to combine all this together. It's a grand total of 400 damage factor for the active skill. That's not very much. But he is increasing skill damage of allied troops by 30% for 3 seconds, and 50 rage per second. So a boost to the rage gen, boost to the damage, amazing. However, incoming damage is increased by 25% to this commander. So there's many things we need to talk about here with this skill alone. The first thing we need to talk about is the fact that the debuff portion of this, there's a downside. He takes increased damage by 25% for 3 seconds, but it is only Trajan that takes the increased damage. So the nearby marches get the rage gen, they get the skill damage, they don't get the debuff. The way this was worded, it wasn't quite clear if only his march or also the other marches would get the debuff. So great news, only his march takes that debuff. But there's more. It was recently uncovered that the entire time we've been playing Rise of Kingdoms, AoE buffers like Trajan, Joan of Arc, Mulan, Cleopatra, and so on actually only buff 5 total marches. Whoa. That is a big difference from the way this is worded. Now, I want to dedicate this video to Trajan, and I've got some pretty strong feelings about the importance of the descriptions of the skills being accurate. But what I'll say is that the nature of the buff is not actually changed. In other words, these AoE buffs, commanders like Joan of Arc and so on, they've always been buffing 5 marches, and they've always been good. They're still the correct commander to bring. It changes literally nothing about whether or not you would bring them, unless maybe your Ark of Osiris team was bringing like 500 Joan of Arcs, but I don't know why you would do that. So all that to say, nothing really changes about whether or not you'd use an AoE buffer. The answer is yes. Even constrained to 5 marches, it's still so good, you use it. And yes, we could find a breakpoint for this where we would say, yeah, having the buff is better than having just raw damage. And I would guess even just 3 marches getting the buff might be good enough to say, yep, AoE buffs are still the jam. So all that to say, Trajan is buffing 5 marches total, and only his march gets the debuff. I told you we'd have a lot to talk about with these skills. The second skill is giving you 20% defense all the time, and 20% health as well outside of territory. This is fantastic for Ark of Osiris, you're off territory. This is fantastic for Canyon, you are off territory. Not so good for defending your own territory, you're only getting a 20% defense boost, but when you're on your enemy's territory, you get a nice health boost too. I'll argue that in many cases in KVK, you are spending a lot of your time on your own territory. And if you step onto enemy territory for field battling, the problem is that you're probably getting hit by the Theodora AoE of the flag, almost guaranteed that like you're very close to the flag and it's dangerous. So I mention that because for the most part, I'm pretty hyped about this buff, this second skill, giving you an extra boost when you're outside of Alliance territory, but it's not quite as good as meets the eye. I've been calling it 40% of defensive stats, but it's really 20% when you're on territory and 20 more % of health when you're off territory. Now, the next skill has been one that's received a lot of debate, which is Great Expeditions. You get 10% troop capacity flat. That's great. But there's more if you bring mixed troops, 3 different troop types. Now, you can't bring different tiers of the same troop type. That's 3 different troop types. Archers, infantry, cavalry. Don't bring siege. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's some funny thing you could do with siege here. I haven't figured out what that is yet, but he is a support commander. I don't know. I don't think so, but maybe I'll put more thought into that later. They will deal additional direct damage factor to the current target when the active skill is used, when you have that mixed troops, and that is 300 damage factor. This also increases the damage dealt to the target for 3 seconds by 20%. So that's a big deal. You're increasing the damage the target takes by 20% for 3 seconds, and you get 300 extra damage factor. Obviously, this is a commander where in a perfect world, you get this buff. But his other skills are still so good that even if you don't bring mixed troops, he seems like he could be a very strong commander. But let's continue on. The last skill. Now, if you were in my live stream yesterday, which will be good to go and check out if you want to see what his animation looks like. It's pretty freaking badass. Card up in the top if you'd like to see that. What I'll say of this last skill is that it boosts your defense over time. Every 8 seconds, you get an additional 6% defense, stacking 10 times. That's 60% defense in a very, very, very long fight, longer than you'll ever be in an open field brawl. But the defense stacking here is really nice, and I did testing with this. The defense stacks start on the very second turn of battle. In other words, when I went and I battled a barbarian, on the first turn, I did damage to the barbarian. On the second turn, I had the extra stacks of defense starting to accumulate, and then subsequently every 8 seconds, I would get a new stack. So this does give you, once you have this skill maxed, 6 defense right away, which is honestly not very much. And fights don't actually last that long in most cases. In fact, where will a fight last long? For a rally, but are we rallying mixed with a buffing commander? No. This is not a commander I think we're going to be rallying with. I don't think so. So, okay. So he's not good for rallies. Then that's not particularly great. Where are you in a long battle? Canyon's a nice long fight. Okay. In Canyon, that's a good fight. In Ark of Osiris mid-brawls, even there, you'll fall out of combat if you're not very closely watching your march. It's unusual that you will actually be in combat. Like, really think about this. That you will actually ever get this to stack more than 3 or 4 times. In most situations, you're in combat briefly, you leave combat. It's rare that you find yourself in that all-in, full-commit brawl where you're going to just ride this march out until it's dead. That is unusual. But in that instance, you are getting a lot of defense, and the stacking defense here is nice. So this kit overall is very strong. We want to pair this commander with someone who is going to be okay with having mixed troops, and not every commander or really will be. But before we get into all of those pairings, I want to talk very briefly about the talents, because this is very important. The reason you would use Trajan Primary is for his talents. That's why you would use him here. So we need to get a look at talents to show this. Because he's a versatility commander, I'm going to get a look at Ethelfled. Leadership and support. Same 2 primary trees here. This is pretty much the build I would be using. There is some variation you could take. For instance, if you were pairing with a commander that does healing, you could ditch the left portion of the tree over here in leadership and drop that in to the healing related talents right over here. I mentioned siege units earlier, mostly as a joke, but some of the very best talent points in the game are right here. Expert design. Look at this. 18% of stats for 3 talent points is a little bit busted. I'm not saying that Trajan with siege units is a thing, but anytime there's an opportunity to potentially break something, I'm just keeping my eye on what's happening here, okay? We're watching that. More important to watch, however, is a couple things in this tree. First of all, I want to call your attention to Rejuvenate. This generates 150 rage when a skill is used. Remember that number. It's going to be important. I want to call your attention to Strategic Prowess. 20% defense the next 2 seconds when an active skill is used. Remember that. This is important. I'll remind you, but keep this in mind. He is going to reduce skill damage taken, and when you take skill damage, further reduce the skill damage that you take, which is kind of a nice thing when you're in a big brawl. And I want to call your attention to the fact that he's giving march speed, but it doesn't care about a unit type. This is important because when we compare to other commanders and their talent trees, the problem we'll see is that we're going to have a conflict here with the need to have all one troop type versus the benefits we get if we could use Trajan and have multiple troop types. Okay, and to be able to get the full third skill working for us. So if we go now to the pairings, I'm going to show you the pairing that I plan to use, that I am most hyped about, and then I'm going to share other things. And my philosophy here might be weird, and I don't know that I've heard other people really talk about pairing with this commander, but I think this is going to be pretty freaking exciting, and that's Herald. Oh yeah. Now I told you, remember that number, 150 rage. Remember that number, 20% defense for 2 seconds. Why? Because when Herald has his 4th skill, Stamford Bridge trigger, it counts as a use of an active skill. This is a big deal. You may as well add, if you had a Trajan primary, this skill may as well read that not only does it have a 20% chance to cast that active skill again, right, and grant immunity to all defense reduction effects for 3 seconds, it may as well also say, and gives you 150 rage, and gives you 20% defense for 2 seconds, right? That's what it means to have the active skill go off again. Any of those talents that benefit from the active skill, this actually qualifies, okay? And you can prove this. This is easy to prove. You just watch, for instance, a commander with the defense tree that has the healing talents, and I've used this a lot, by the way. I use this in Canyon right now. The defense tree, these healing talents, these trigger anytime Stamford Bridge goes off. It's amazing. Okay, so keep that in mind. But the other reason that I want a Trajan primary with a Herald secondary is that Herald, although yes, he buffs infantry, doesn't require all infantry. This is a big deal. So what this means is that I could use mixed troops, and when people try to focus down the Trajan, which they should, right? Trajan makes himself take 25% more damage. They should try to focus that. Herald will punish. Herald is going to punish by having 20% counterattack damage boost, and he punishes by having his attack turn into area of effect damage. That is exactly what I want. The thing that I don't want of Herald is for him to be ignored. And I get that he'll do a lot of damage if he's ignored, but I want to do AoE damage and do as much wrecking as I possibly can, as fast as I can. To do that, you have to target my Herald. Now, Trajan is giving you a nice incentive to go and do so, but Trajan is giving me 40% of defensive stats. That's 20% defense, 20% health. He's giving me a stacking defense buff to counteract the fact that I've got a stacking defense reduction. Yeah, no, I think that combination could be really fun to try, and I'm very much looking forward to it. The biggest downside of a leadership commander primary is the fact that gear is much harder to have for that commander, right? Like, I don't have a ton of leadership infantry gear, although I have some. I do have some, weirdly enough. I'll probably be leaning on legendary gear to kind of make up that gap, because obviously almost none of my legendary gear is special talented, and that's going to give me the same amount of stats base, whereas a lot of my other gear, in fact, this is the case for pretty much everyone who's not a major spender in the game, right? You're getting a lot of your benefit on your equipment from these special talents. Unless you have a leadership infantry set, you're going to lose out on a lot of stats. So with all that said, what are some of the other pairs that I think are really good? I want to touch on a few other pairs where you really punish the enemy for having attacked you. Because that's, I think, the coolest thing. They're going to hunt Trajan. So when can I turn people hunting Trajan into an advantage? An example of where you could turn that into an advantage is Cyrus the Great. When Cyrus the Great is being attacked, he starts doing area of effect damage. The downside, and the reason I'm not as excited about Cyrus compared to Harold, is that Cyrus does actually require all archers, to get the benefit of the third skill. But the upside of a commander like Cyrus is that he's going to give himself more rage gen and defense and attack every time an active skill is used. So you're going to be generating more rage from Trajan. You're going to use that to get this skill going off more often. But the thing is, I feel like Cyrus the Great, because he requires all archers, might just be a better commander to have nearby getting the buff rather than be the one who is the secondary to Trajan, quite frankly. And actually, I would probably use Cyrus primary in that case rather than have the Trajan primary, because you're going to benefit more, I would argue, from the archer talents at that point, probably, than from the support related talents. Now, there are other commanders that don't exactly want you to attack them, but are very, very tanky. An example of a few of those commanders would be Constantine. Constantine is even buffing all troop types, which is pretty cool. So Constantine with Trajan could be, I think, pretty exciting. There's pros and cons to using each of them as the primary commander, but I would probably lean toward a Trajan. Same is true with Richard I. Man, nothing is going to make you feel like you're wasting your time more than hitting Trajan and then realizing Richard I is the secondary commander. Richard is going to heal. That's going to give Trajan a lot of sustain. He reduces the damage taken and has some counterattack damage boost. Yeah, this gives a little bit of life back into Richard, despite the fact that there are a lot of healing debuffs running around. I think that Charles Martel is an interesting idea as a tanky commander, but less exciting, in part because a lot of the benefit he gives is the march speed, and this is giving infantry units the march speed. I don't think that's all unit types, so you're going to lose some of the benefit here you're getting from the expertise skill on Charles Martel, but I will say, I do like the counterattack boost. Yeah, you want to hit Charles Martel? Well, guess what? You know, Trajan's going to generate a lot of rage. Charles Martel's going to be throwing up those shields more frequently. Okay, he's going to boost the counterattack damage he does. I think it's an okay pair, but some of these other pairs I've mentioned will be better. No, I think one of the premier pairs, quite frankly, is going to be Ethelfled. No question about it. Ethelfled with Trajan, use the Ethelfled primary, right? Between the two of them, they're both very attractive targets to go and hit. I would argue Trajan is more attractive than Ethelfled, so hide your Trajan behind Ethelfled. The only reason you would consider going the other way is if you're not worried about being focused down as much. I think you should be. One of the main reasons to use a Trajan primary is that you're boosting skill damage. So obviously, if you boost your skill damage and then have a high skill damage commander behind them, that's really amazing. So that's one main argument for using Trajan primary, Ethelfled secondary, because she does a lot of skill damage. 800 damage factor times 5 targets is 4,000 damage factor. That's a big deal. That's a lot of damage factor and a nice debuff to boot. So I think that the Ethel-Trajan combo could be very strong, or Trajan-Ethel. And the other thing I like here is she reduces the counterattack damage she is taking. She also is boosting the damage dealt, which is really quite nice, but it's going to require 3 different troop types to get an attack boost. The damage dealt comes from slow effects, which she issues out a couple of those, one from the support tree and one over here. So I think Ethel with Trajan is a solid pair. Now, a bunch of folks are starting to talk about Hannibal Barca again. And I think the reason that this is resurfacing as a conversation is largely for very young kingdoms. Because the reality is that in a month from now, you're going to be able to pick the commander that shows up on the wheel. And the reality is that because KVK has popped so fast, I mean, if you can believe it, kingdoms are entering KVK Season 1, and I've heard of kingdoms that then enter KVK Season 2 2 weeks after. Literally, KVK 1 ends and they enter KVK Season 2 2 weeks later. It's crazy. So they're getting to the point where they're going to be able to pick the wheel commander very soon. And so realistically, your mid-tier spenders are not going to have 10 expertise legendaries by that point. Probably not. So your mid to low spenders might have a Hannibal Barca on hand and not have all the other legendaries in a great position, which means, yeah, Hannibal Barca with Trajan would be an okay combo. And what you're really leaning on with Hannibal Barca is the strength of his AoE debuff. It's very good. It's not going to look good in his report because he doesn't do much damage at all. Neither does Trajan. It's really all about making everyone nearby way more effective. That's what Hannibal Barca does. I'm not saying he's a great commander. In fact, I literally just said he's the number 2 commander on my list to get reworked, only behind Charlemagne, just to be clear. But in the very early game, he definitely has a role, and it would be ridiculous to ignore that. In terms of other pairings, I'm going to try to just blaze through some of these and talk about whether I think they're good or bad, because there's so many viable considerations. YSG, I don't think it's fantastic. I think there's better choices. Same is true with Double C. I think you can find other choices. Minamoto, the same. They're just too interested in being all in on cavalry, whereas Trajan really would benefit from that mixed troop type. A cavalry commander, however, that is much, much, much better for a mixed troop type will be Saladin. Yeah, he's got 5% cavalry march speed that you're basically going to lose out on the second you bring infantry into that march. The cav march speed at that point isn't doing anything for you. But if you bring mostly cavs, 40% of stats is still really good. This skill doesn't care about having all cavalry. Yeah, no, Saladin's secondary is actually pretty beast for Trajan. That is a great consideration. Don't use Khan. Khan cares about all cavalry. You could use Alexander the Great. I want to call your attention to something. The second skill makes it so that when he is on the map, troops led by this commander are immune to all damage reduction debuffs. This is not a damage taken reduction debuff. In other words, this does not make you immune to Trajan's self debuff. What it makes you immune to is actually a commander like Richard I, who has an AoE damage reduction effect, okay? So this reduces damage dealt, or at least Alexander the Great is immune to damage dealt reduction effects. He's still an amazing commander to pair with Trajan because most of his skills don't care about infantry that much, or at least you don't have to have all infantry to enjoy the benefit. So yeah, you'll lose out on the benefit of the march speed in here, some of the benefit anyways, but you'll still enjoy the attack boost since you're bringing mostly infantry. And the thing I like about this is that, yeah, it's a lot of buffing and debuffing, and also you're shielding yourself, which is really quite nice. Yeah, I think the Alexander the Great pair is totally fine. I would not pair with Edward of Woodstock. That dude is doing the opposite of what you want. He needs a strong rage engine, true, but you want Edward of Woodstock to be getting the buff from Trajan in a separate march. Attila, strong commander, not to pair with the old Trajan. Guan Yu, interestingly enough, if we actually look at his skills, the active skill doesn't require you to have infantry. The third skill doesn't require you to have infantry. The fourth skill doesn't require you to have infantry. I think this could be an okay pair, but I mean, there's really no punish by pairing Guan Yu with Trajan. You're not really punishing the enemy for attacking that. Honestly, you want to target down a Guan Yu. He does a lot of damage. Knock out the Guan Yu. And having Trajan there too is like, oh yeah, no, that's the right march to hit, everybody. That's definitely the right march to hit. For that reason, I don't love that pairing. The same is true for William, by the way. I don't want to create a pairing that's so obvious for you to take down, and there's no downside for you to doing it. William, Trajan, dude, that is the most insane buffing, debuffing, you could bring all calves or not sort of a march. William doesn't care about having all cavalry. You don't have to have all cavalry. You can have mixed troops for William. I'm not saying that's what I would do. I'm just saying you could do that, but it would be so desirable to focus, it's not going to work well. You know, I really like the Herald pair. Ramses does require all archers, so I think that's not the most amazing pair. You really do want to try to find a way to get the benefit of that third skill from Trajan. Now, I wouldn't pair with Freddy for the same reason I wouldn't pair with Guan. There's no punish for targeting that. Julius Caesar becomes a curious and interesting pairing because Julius actually offers a lot of tankiness and you get to bring more troops. So yeah, focus me down. But guess what? Julius Caesar is all about that anyways on this second skill. So it's kind of an interesting idea. Very tanky, but you could do it, especially in the early game. El Cid is a curious commander. I don't think this is the pairing that you want to be on. It doesn't really benefit very much from the skill damage. Neither does Julius Caesar, by the way. So those are, they're fine pairings, but not amazing. Mehmed, same story as Freddy. There's just no punish if they try to swarm you down, which they will do if you pair with Mehmed. Tamaris, she really wants a commander that is not generating a lot of rage to do more with the stacks of her poison here. So not a great pairing. I would say that Takeda, also not a good pairing, although he is very, very tanky and survivable, which I like. He does require all calves. I mean, you could do something sort of interesting with like a Takeda Trajan, but the talent trees are not good for that. You'd have to do a Trajan Takeda, but then you're losing out on the benefit of the 3 troop types. You could do it. It would be weird. But Theodora, I mean, I know I'm talking about a lot of commanders here, but there's a lot of considerations. Theodora is a garrison commander, but she's so good that for a time I was using her in Canyon and she was doing better than what I was using before. And I got a lot of commanders at my disposal. A lot of commanders. Only when I got Nebuchadnezzar did I actually swap her out. For perspective. Yeah, she's really good. So she actually will remove 1 second of the time where you have that debuff for damage taken, where Trajan is self-inflicting that debuff. She clears all debuffs, right? Kind of a big deal. Kind of a big deal. So 1/3 of that self-inflicted debuff that Trajan has is dealt with, which is kind of nice from the Theodora. But it's only 1 second. It's not... I think this is cute. I don't think this is good. Because there's no punish for focusing this march. You're still going to focus it down. Up next is Artemisia. Now this I kind of like. Artemisia is friggin' tanky, dudes. She is really tanky. Archers get 20% defense, 20% health. In addition, you silence yourself and then deal more damage. Ooh. Combine that with Trajan's tankiness. No, I love this pairing. I actually love this pairing, and it doesn't require all archers. So yeah. No, this is one. This is why we're going 1 by 1 here. This is some gold right here, I think. Trajan primary, Artemisia secondary. You boost that skill damage. She has 1,800 damage factor. Yeah. Hopefully that doesn't boost the damage she does to herself. It honestly might, which is kind of funny. But I really like that pairing a lot. I think that could do very well. It doesn't punish in the same way that Herald punishes, but it certainly has the potential to get a whole bunch of people to line up for you to knock down with your AoE, which I think is not so bad. She's got the tankiness to make that an okay thing. The next commander we could get a look at is Nebu, and although Nebu does have some defensive capability over here, he doesn't actually care about having all archers. I mean, you could do it. You could do it for the same reason that you could pair with Artemisia. I will point out that Artemisia is more tanky, and you won't get the benefit with a mixed troop type of this extra march speed, but it is something you could do. Looking in at a buffer like Mulan, I think the problem with a Trajan Mulan march is you've just made yourself way too obvious of a target. Like, obviously you take that march out. Obviously that has to go. There's no downside to hitting that. I guess that she reduces the damage taken while surrounded, which is kind of cute, but it's only by 5%. It's really not that much. Yeah, she can reduce the rage of the attacker, but it's only every 5 seconds. The more people hitting her, the better that is. I just don't quite think there's enough punish if you pair these together, that it just becomes obvious you have to focus them down. As I said earlier, and this is very important, even though AoE buffs only hit 5 marches, AoE buffs are still so good, you have to deal with them. Up next, Leonidas. This dude cares about having all infantry, so he's not a great pair. I think that you could bring an all infantry march, but like the pairing is not giving you this benefit over here, which is the extra damage that you deal when the target is affected by a silence or attack reduction. Trajan doesn't do that. So I don't love that. I do like the tankiness of the Leonidas. He's giving you health. That's good. He's got defense. That's good. He's also giving you speed of rage gained, which means you're going to fire off your skills more frequently. I guess if you're running your Trajan to the ground, there's a little bit of shielding here. There's a little bit of tankiness. I guess it's not the worst. It's just it wouldn't be my first choice either. I don't particularly like the Lu Bu. There's not a lot of punish when people come to swarm you. I think it's going to make it a really obvious thing for you to get knocked out. And Chandragupta, you're going to have to use all cavalry to get the benefit of the stacks of exhaust here. So already I'm not in love with this combination. You could do it, but I think the upside is not quite there. Of course, the last legendary I suppose we could talk about is Moctezuma. Now, neither of them particularly care about the troop type, but I don't think there's really a punish here if they try to focus you down. So I would say that this is probably not the best pairing. And although for a short time, you'll get the benefit of doing a lot of damage back to the attackers, I think there's plenty of other ways you could enjoy that benefit in a big field brawl without getting yourself obliterated. So yeah, I don't think that the Trajan Moctezuma pairing is going to be top tier. Now you'll notice I didn't talk about epic pairings. I'm making this assumption again that most people that were going to be getting this commander are kind of in the late game already. But I will point out that if you were in the early game, there are some deceptively good pairings here. Scipio Africanus, buddy, gets a breath of fresh air. And you're really a sitting duck march. But that's where Scipio kind of shines. The thing that he'll do well is reduce your damage taken. He will increase his counterattack damage. The more you're hitting him, the more you're going to boost his damage and heal him. He brings more troops. I'm not saying this is top tier, but I am saying for the epics, there's a punish here for focusing down a Trajan primary. There is a punish. I'll say that, look, like, by the time we're talking about bringing epics, though, the thing is that you should probably just bring fewer marches onto the field than try to bring, like, 5 marches with a bunch of epics in there in KVK Season 4 and get kind of wrecked by folks that have spent way, way, way more in the game. And then you field fight for like 3 minutes, you're out of resources and speed ups. I think you're better off having fewer marches, but having them be very, very strong. And so I would hope that that pairing is not with Scipio, but that perhaps there is some other legendary that you've already expertise, like even Alexander the Great, right? Your Trajan Alex pair. At least that is a stronger pair than trying to use a Scipio Africanus. Oh my gosh. The same cuteness I mentioned earlier with clearing debuffs from Theodora is true of Kusunoki. You can use that. It will be cute. I'm not saying it's good, but clearing the debuff for a second is cute. Sun Tzu's good with pretty much every commander, so there's always that. But let me know, this is enough about the epics. Let me know what you think about this Commander Trajan. Is he going to be completely game-changing? I think the reality of AoE buffs is that they're always extremely powerful. And if we talk about restoring 150 rage, this is true of why Joan of Arc is so good, right? I mean, this buff is so good. It's kind of like giving every march you have, literally every march you have. If we want to be really specific, it's like giving them a pendant of Eternal Night, except, 6 of them. It's like giving them 6 of them. It depends on how frequently you think they're going to actually have this buff maintained, but we'll just say on average, like, if you maintain it like a third of the time, right? They're maintaining that 3-second skill damage buff. That's like giving all your marches 2 pendants of Eternal Night. I mean, that's really good, right? The rage generation is like popping a Horn of Fury onto every one of your marches nearby. I mean, the buff is so good, there's a reason it comes with a downside. And I think that a skilled enough player or team where you're grouped up with some really powerful folks is going to just really benefit from this buff, even though it only hits 5 marches. And even though I would really like the descriptions to all be extremely accurate in this game, that doesn't change the fact that 5 marches is more than enough to absolutely dominate with that Trajan skill. If you enjoyed this video, do me a huge favor. Throw a like on here. Consider subscribing for those daily Rise of Kingdoms videos. If we had gotten this commander and we were in the realm of being able to pick our wheels, I think I would probably snap expertise him. For now, I've got to wait until I unlock him. It's 2 weeks from now, presumably. And then after that, hopefully 2 weeks from then, we'll be at the point where we can choose our wheel commander and mightiest governor commander. And I'll just probably pick Ramses for the wheel and then snap expertise Trajan. So be on the lookout for that. Subscribe if you want to see when that happens. And until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.